From Korea to Germany. From Alaska to Puerto Rico. All over the world, the United States Army is on the alert to defend our country, you, the American people, against aggression. This is the big picture. An official television report to the nation from the United States Army. Now, to show you part of the big picture, here is Sergeant Stuart Queen.
How do you do? The American soldier in Berlin lives and performs his duties in a strange atmosphere. 100 miles deep in the Soviet zone of Germany, along with his allies in the British and French sectors of Berlin, he defends the prestige and interests of democracy. While in the east sector of the city, the Russians and their puppet government plot and propagandize against us.
Berlin, Germany is a city of monuments. Some of them a little worse for wear. But there are two monuments in Berlin erected since World War II. They're not just mementos either. They are symbols of an unfinished story, an unresolved conflict. One erected by a hard and bitter conqueror, whose foot remains on the throat of the fallen enemy, a shrine to the might of the naked bayonet. The other, put up by the vanquished German people themselves to honor a force that seeks to lift its former enemy back to his feet, so he may find a decent place in the family of nations. One is the Russian War Memorial, figure of towering strength, unveiled in 1945 to strike fear in the heart of Berlin. The other is the monument to the airlift at Tempelhof Airdrome, dedicated by Berliners to the Allied airmen who died flying in the sustenance of life to a hungry city during the Russian blockade of 1948-1949. It is the trust rather than the duty of the American soldier in Berlin to sustain with his every action this essential difference in spirit in dealing with our former enemy. For the Allied sector of Berlin where he serves is an island of democracy, standing 100 miles deep into the Soviet zone of Germany, behind the Iron Curtain. Side by side in the one community, the American soldier sees totalitarian communism and democracy, presenting perhaps more sharply than anywhere else on earth a comparison in significance and effect of the two ways of life. In the eastern sector of Berlin, empty stomachs and fear. Hatred to make men with stones stand up against Russian soldiers with tanks. In the western sectors, a free people rebuilding their part of a shattered city with hope and with faith in the future. But let's explore Berlin through the eyes of the soldier. Members of the American garrison, 6th Infantry Regiment, stationed here to uphold and protect U.S. interests. Like the private first class there, and the corporal. How about it, men? Corporal, how does it all hit you?
Well, I'm seeing a lot I never dreamed about back home in Greenway, Arkansas. Off-duty hours, my buddy and I get around quite a bit. There's a lot of sightseeing to be done in Berlin, all kinds of interesting ruins. Like the Kaiser Wilhelm Church on Kurfürstendamm, built by Wilhelm II in memory of his granddaddy. Isn't much but a shell now. The Nazis used it like a fort at the end and it really got hurt. Almost all over Berlin there are ruined buildings. Rubble spilling out of the few walls that are still up. Together with the bombing the city took and the last-ditch fight when the Russians were moving in, a lot of it really got blown apart. Now this used to be a real swank section of town. A lot of the embassies of foreign nations located around here. That was our Italian embassy when Mussolini was a partner of Hitler. And that was our own embassy, the Embassy of the United States. Pretty badly beat up. And here we are at the Russian War Memorial over in the British sector. The inscription under the soldier says, "Hail the victory of the Anglo-Soviet American military alliance over the German fascist invaders." But the memorial was unveiled back in 1945 when they were talking that way. Now they keep a guard on duty with a loaded Tommy gun all the time. The cannon is one of the pieces the Russians used in the taking of Berlin. And that's the Reichstag in the back, built in 1894 for the Prussian Parliament. Funny thing, it wasn't hurt by the war. Hitler himself is supposed to have had it burned down back in 1933 so he could claim the communists did it and scare the people into giving him more power. Yep, ruins and more ruins in Berlin. But you notice something else after you've looked around for a while. The Berliners aren't beat. What won't stand up, they're hauling down and out of the rubble and the ruin, they're building themselves another city, a new Berlin. It's back-breaking work, doing it the hard way, without much machinery and fancy equipment. But there seems to be a kind of will to clear away the results of a terrible mistake and get going again anew. Only 1/5 of the city's 1.5 million dwellings were undamaged by the war, and it's been figured that 10 trains of 50 cars each could leave Berlin daily, loaded full up with rubble, and it would still take 16 years to clear away the mess. So every brick, every hunk of building stuff that can be saved is saved. As for the rest, while they're beautifying the city with it, filling the debris up to make hills and turning the hills into parks like this. This used to be a flat area. Now it's the highest point in Berlin, a beautiful new park situated on top of a rubble heap. And Berlin comes out of the junk pile. New homes, new public buildings and factories, a new life. And everywhere the same sign, informing free Berliners the USA is helping on the projects. So a country that didn't know how to get along with the rest of the world learns firsthand something about the kindness and fairness of democratic folks. New houses for the homeless. A decent place to raise kids to help them grow up into decent people. Helping them to make Berlin beautiful again, restore the Tiergarten, one of the most beautiful parks in the world. New trees are growing already. The landscaping's coming along where it was all barren and stripped. Because during the winter of 1945 and 46, what was left of the old trees had to be cut down for fuel. Most of the new trees are gifts from German towns all over the Western Zone. And they're tearing down that memory from a nightmare up on the hill. That concrete structure there was a giant air shelter during the war, built to house 30,000 people. The fancier things in life are coming back too, to Berlin. Walk down Kurfürst Dam and you'd think you were on 5th Avenue, New York City. And maybe the most important of all things, food. The western sector of Berlin are eating good. Guess you know how much interest in democratic ways that's gotten from Soviet zone Germans. If you read about the food riots over on the other side of town where the communists are running things. Over here, the West Berliners, with the backing of our government, have been handing out free food parcels to any East German who manages to get across the line for it. Thousands have risked their necks to bust through the Iron Curtain to take advantage of the offer. With the Russians stopping train service and doing everything else they can to keep the people in their zone from coming over for their free food. So it's bored a kind of peephole in the Iron Curtain, with the Germans in the Soviet zone getting a look at how much better off the western sectors are, and giving the world a look at just how bad things are in East Germany. Industry in our part of Berlin is humming too. Folks are back at the workbenches and the factories without anybody having to belong to anybody else's party to get a job. Production is on its way up to pre-war times, and that's in spite of anything the communists have been able to do to stop it. When the Russians moved out of our part of Berlin, they took a lot along with them, including everything movable in the electric plant. That meant no juice for industry or lighting, except what was supplied from East Berlin plants. That gave the communists the trump hand. But then with the help of the U.S., West Berliners went to work building up from practically scratch a new electric supply. Through the Marshall Plan, the United States supplied some of the necessary equipment. The rest was up to the Berliners. And the lights came back on in free Berlin. West Berliners are getting back to their cultural life too. The auditoriums that could be fixed up have been repaired, the movie halls altered, and concerts are a big thing in Berlin again. They've been doing some other kind of repairing also. Anti-Nazi musicians who were banned by Hitler are welcome back, like the great composer Paul Hindemith there.
Ein bisschen mehr, nicht zu sehr stoßen und mehr ins Worte gehen. Da ist ein Takt, da haben wir alle kein Crescendo gemacht. Nach 52, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Takt nach 52 haben wir alle Crescendo. Hörner, wenn Sie da raufkommen, vor 53, nicht sondern alles ein bisschen breiter, gell? Alles aufs Breite hinspielen. Machen wir mal den Anfang. 2, 3.
Suppose you know there isn't much chance for an American to see East Berlin, the Russian sector, They've got most of their part of the city blockaded, going and coming. When things aren't too tense, though, a special trip is allowed to see what the Russians call the Garden of Remembrance. That lady there is supposed to represent Mother Russia. The whole memorial is in honor of Red soldiers killed in the fight for Berlin and was built by German labor working day and night for 18 months. The Russian soldier on top of the mausoleum is carrying a child on his left arm, but in case anybody might think he's going soft, I guess, in his right hand, he's holding a double-edged sword. Sort of like the way they let tours come over into the Russian sector. Everything's going along nice and friendly, and then all of a sudden, like happened a little while back, one of the tour buses is fired on by communist police. Interesting thing about the Garden of Remembrance is that most of its material came out of the wreck of the Reich Chancellery, Hitler's old headquarters, which is also in the eastern sector. The hole in the back of the Chancellery is where Hitler and his bride are supposed to have ended up. They were believed cremated there after they committed suicide. The Russians made certain understandable alterations in design of the Chancellery building. And they also ordered other kinds of changes in their sector, like carting off to Russia most of the machinery needed to give their own sector of Berlin a chance to get back on its feet. Yep, the Russians have played it pretty tough in their part of town, setting up a police state kind of control. But in spite of that, West Berlin is finding ways of letting the people in the communist sector know that democracy is working fine just across the way. A method of passing on the uncensored news of the day and the facts of life to Berliners on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain. An electric news sign just over the western border of the Russian sector, its message beamed on the folks in East Berlin. An idea borrowed, I guess, right from Times Square, New York City. The Free Berliner Press, a kind of beacon up there shining right through the communist blackout to bring East Berliners some of the truth of the free world. The truth has had some effect, too. East Berliners aren't taking it lying down from the communists anymore. They're making their own headlines for all the world to read about, to see how people react to living under the blessings of the Russians and their German communist stooges. And every day, by hook or crook, more Soviet zoners find their way over to West Berlin. Lots of them risking their lives to get to the free world just across town. Whole families by the tens of thousands give up everything they own except what they can cram into a couple of suitcases so they can live and raise their kids in the new Federal Republic of Western Germany. Because Western Berlin itself couldn't possibly accommodate the thousands of refugees who come over, the German Republic is cooperating with the Allies, arranges air transportation, freedom flights they call them, to carry the people to sanctuary in Western Germany. Every refugee is carefully questioned and screened on his reasons for leaving the Soviet zone. If he can prove that he fled because of extreme danger or equally pressing reasons, he is entitled to permanent residence in West Germany and the right to work there, besides his flight to freedom across the Russian territory surrounding Berlin. And business is good on this hop, with chartered planes flying out nearly 1,000 refugees every day, with backlogs of as high as 60,000 others waiting their turn for a freedom flight. The Kommandantur, which is the international body responsible for governing of West Berlin, occupies the Allied Control Building in Kleitz Park. There are poles in front of the buildings for the flags of 4 different nations: the French, the British, the American, and the Russian. Only the Russian flag don't fly there anymore. Their ideas just don't jibe with democracies on the way to lead a people back to an honorable life, and they walked out of the Kommandantur in 1948. Since then, the representatives of the remaining three powers, military and civilian, work side by side, relaxing controls, helping a democratic West Berlin establish itself as a part of the free world. Interestingly enough, the Russians continue to cooperate with the democracies on just one job in Berlin, guarding Spandau Prison. Maybe it's because it's a kind of a specialty of theirs, keeping people under lock and key. Anyhow, all four governments are responsible for guarding the prison, which has just a few inmates, but they're the top former Nazi leaders alive today. And that's how it is that American troops in Berlin still meet the Russians on peaceful terms, and the changing of the guard when we take over our tour. Yep, and there's even a handshake, according to the rules of military courtesy. Yes, sir, soldiering in Berlin is a kind of education, where you don't just hear about what's good and bad in political systems. You get to see how they work out. You get to look at a city that was just about flattened with a population that had to start all over again. And now on one side of town, you find